everybody, and welcome to my channel. If you're tuned in, you are in for a treat. Today, we're going to talk about acid-base balance. First, we're going to talk about a little bit of an AAP lesson review, just to kind of get to know what our foundation is when it comes to acid-base. The range for the pH is 1 to 14. 7 is a neutral number for our pH scale. Anything less than 7 is acidic, and greater than 7 is alkaline. Body fluid pH is 7.35 to 7.45. This is star because you guys need to know that for your normal range for pH. More hydrogen that you have, more acidic it's going to be. So that's how acids are created, by the abundance of hydrogen. Buffers. So as you ladies know, we buff our nails to keep our nails nice and shiny. Gentlemen, we buff floors to keep them nice and shiny. So the buffers in our body system keeps the body shining. It's the fast-acting regulation system. And it keeps the pH within normal limits by either absorbing or releasing ions. Types of buffer systems. Hemoglobin. With hemoglobin, maintenance is done by the chloride shift. Okay, and the chloride shift is when chloride leaves and then bicarb comes in. Bicarb leaves and then chloride comes in. This occurs when the level of oxygen changes in the blood. So our first disorder we're going to talk about in acid-base balance is respiratory acidosis. Respiratory acidosis is characterized by any condition that causes hypoventilation, or obstruction of airway. And we've listed a few examples here: asthma, brain trauma, atelectasis, which is collapsing of the alveoli, pulmonary edema, and COPD. And we know COPD is kind of a host of obstructive lung disorders like emphysema and bronchitis. So what do we do for these patients? You want to correct the cause. Remember that any type of acid-base imbalance is a secondary disorder. Any type of acid-base imbalance is a secondary disorder. So our mnemonic for today is breathe. Sit the head of the bed up. Reduce restlessness. Endotracheal intubation if necessary. Administer respiratory treatments. Turn, cough, and deep breathe, and hydration to thin those secretions. So that's breathe, B-R-E-A-T-H. Respiratory alkalosis, any condition causing overstimulation of the respiratory system. So that's hyperventilation. Causes for that can include fever, hyperventilation, fear or panic, and pain. So what do we want these patients to do? We want them to slow their breathing down. So we're going to monitor for signs of respiratory distress. We want to lend that emotional support to these patients because they could be in a panic mode. Offer breathing technique assistance and wear rebreather mask or the brown paper bag technique. Metabolic acidosis, loss of too much base or retention of too much acid. Some causes that we see here is DKA, aspirin, high-fat diet, decreased metabolism of carbs, malnutrition, diarrhea, and renal insufficiency. So for these patients, if they're diabetic or in DKA, we want to give them insulin and monitor symptoms. If they have kidney disease or renal insufficiency, dialysis and diet. Remember your diet for kidney disease. You want a low protein, high calorie diet. And that low protein is so that the kidneys won't have to work as hard. General treatment, fluid and electrolyte replacement, I's and O's, intakes and outputs. And we want to increase a buffer base. We can give that IV. And we want to monitor for seizure precautions. Metabolic alkalosis, increase in base or a decrease in available acids. And this is caused by diarrhea, vomiting, high aldosterone. Now, one thing to remember, and we're just going to jump back for a quick second. When it comes to our metabolic acidosis. And as we see, diarrhea is listed on here, which is very, very true. The diarrhea that we're talking about, though, is very profuse when it comes to acidosis, okay? But when we go back up to alkalosis, diarrhea is also listed, but it's not in the profuse form. Vomiting is really the hallmark symptom of metabolic alkalosis. So our treatment here is going to be IV fluids and potassium replacement. Arterial blood gas. This is how we are able to find and determine the status if they're acidotic or if they are alkaline. Our normal range, like we said, for pH is 7.35 to 7.45. Carbon dioxide is 35 to 45, and bicarb is 22 to 28. The Allen's test, that is done prior to an ABG to determine collateral circulation. You want to occlude the artery and watch for blanching. All right. A lot of students have questions about compensation when it comes to acid-base balance. So this nice little chart here that you have here, you have your disorders for respiratory acidosis, and we've broken them up into whether it being compensated, uncompensated, or partially compensated. So let's start with the uncompensation. Okay, so when it's uncompensation, it's kind of the general principle of the acid-base imbalance. So the respiratory opposite, metabolic equal. I don't know if you guys have learned that technique just yet, or method, or mnemonic, if you will, but that is wrong. That is kind of a common thing that we use when we're talking about acid-base imbalance. So respiratory opposite, meaning that when the pH goes one way, the carbon dioxide goes the other. So with respiratory acidosis, we have a decrease in pH and we have an increase in our carbon dioxide. Okay, and that's uncompensation. Respiratory alkalosis, uncompensated, it's going to be the opposite. We're going to have an increase in our pH, and we're going to have a decrease in our carbon dioxide. Metabolic acidosis, metabolic equal. So they're going to go in the same direction. Decrease in pH, decrease in bicarb. With metabolic alkalosis, increase in pH, and an increase in bicarb. Now going on to partial compensation. If it's partially compensated, then we're going to look for a decrease in pH, an increase in bicarb, and an increase in the carbon dioxide for respiratory acidosis. So as you can see, the two values are going to go up together. With respiratory alkalosis, we know that our pH is increased with alkalosis, and we know that our CO2 is decreased, but also our bicarb will be decreased as well. For metabolic acidosis, everything is going down. Decrease in pH, decrease in bicarb, and a decrease in CO2. Metabolic alkalosis, everything's going up. Increase in pH, increase in bicarb, and an increase in CO2. So that's for partial compensation. Now with compensation, full compensation, just remember this one key fact. The pH is normal in full compensation. Okay, so normal pH across the board. Respiratory acidosis, increase in bicarb, increase in CO2. Respiratory alkalosis, we're going to have a decrease in bicarb and a decrease in CO2. Metabolic acidosis, we're going to have a decrease in bicarb and a decrease in CO2. In metabolic alkalosis, we're going to have an increase in bicarb and an increase in CO2. So this concludes our lesson for today on acid-base balance. Please like, comment, make sure you follow us across all platforms, Instagram at TutorMeNurseRN, Facebook on TutorMeNurse. If you didn't subscribe earlier, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications for more videos. Thank you so much. You guys have a good day.